there's a lot of challenges, right? If this was an easy sort of concept or area to manage, right, I wouldn't be here, right? So I think some of the challenges are maintaining transparency in the entire industry with all the different players that we're playing with, holding each other accountable to, not just having guidelines, but following those guidelines, right? I think you also, there's a want to work with everybody, and I think there's a need to be selective about who you work with, right? And ensure that folks have the same high standards, for brand safety that you do, right? And I think the one of the biggest challenges is just staying ahead of the curve, right? Staying up to speed on what's going on, planning down the road, and constantly improving, right? Having a proactive approach, um, to continuing to build that roadmap, right? To stay, safe, secure, and go from there.
Great. Well, let's see. You covered a lot of topics there. I wanted to ask you a bit more specifically about FreeWheel and its stance and role when it comes to protecting CTV media investments. For viewers who also may not even be familiar with what FreeWheel is, maybe you could tell us who you are and then how you protect CTV media investments.
Sure. So FreeWheel, is often known as just an ad server, and I think it's important to take this time to explain to people FreeWheel is more than that. FreeWheel is multi-platforms. It's sort of at the intersection of all things CTV and TV and ad related, right? We're dealing with all sides of the business, right? We're dealing with buyers, sellers, publishers, everyone in between. And it's I think of it sometimes as Comcast's technology arm, right? So it's grown a lot since its inception many years ago. I was actually a client on the ad server side many years ago. So, FreeWheel's stance when it comes to brand safety is that we're responsible for many parts of the ecosystem. So all of our different platforms need to be as safe and secure as the other one, and as what's out there in the marketplace. So we take a very proactive approach. We have a trust and standards group, of which I'm a part of, that's looking at all things brand safety related. So we're talking about ad fraud. We're talking about contextual suitability and brand suitability. We're talking about privacy. We're talking about all those things, and how do we stay ahead of things, right? We want to be at the forefront of protecting all that. We want to have a seat at the table, right? So that means that we've got all these systems, policies, and procedures in place with our platforms, but we also want to be helping to drive where those industry policies are going to go in the future. So that means leaning into the IB, leaning into TAG, leaning into the BSI and any other organizations like that.
So now, if you had one piece of advice or an idea for best practices for practitioners in the space, what would that be? And if you have any examples of work that you've done, please share that too.
Sure. A constant word that comes out of my mouth is proactive. Be proactive. If you think you're doing everything that you can, you probably were 6 months ago. So that means talking to your clients, know who they are, talking to your partners, talking to your platforms, talking to your vendors, and asking them what else they are going to be doing, and you will learn from that. I think education is part of that, right? So leaning in, getting involved, staying on top of what is literally going on in the marketplace, right? Going to whether it be going to conferences or whether it be your weekly call with your vendor, always saying, hey, what do you see? What are the trends that are happening, so that you can figure out what you need to build for moving forward. It's also keeping an open mind, right? Anytime anybody hears the word ad fraud, they just assume it's criminals behind the scenes. And what I think is important to also tell people, and something that, we've learned a lot about, is often there's a gray area. You might have a client who is being misinterpreted. It seems like it's fraud, but it's really not. And one of the great cases I love to talk about with this is we were working with a large device manufacturer, and in one of our vendor platforms, they were appearing, as heavily fraudulent. And we kind of knew there had to be more to that story. So we started, working with them, working separately with one of our fraud vendors. And ultimately, we were able to work through something with them that basically freed up a ton of the majority of the fraud that we saw, right? Almost all of it. And, we've seen fraud, what I would call, mistakable fraud, if you will, or incorrect fraud, where a spelling mistake causes something that appears fraud. So something as simple as that. So you want to be protective, but you also want to be working to what I call free up the revenue. So if there's misinterpreted signals, lean in with your partner, lean in with your vendor, and work through those to sort of, clear them out.
Oh, that's really good advice. Finally, Matthew, I just wanted to ask you a bit about what you expect to see in the future. Let's say the next 6 to 12 months. Is there anything you're keeping an eye on? Perhaps
Sure.
maybe something on your wish list, something you'd like to see? Is there anything keeping you up at night? Any worries?
I mean,
What do you
yeah.
see?
I will say this: if you have a very good protective system, monitoring system, filtering system in place, and you know what's going on with your network, if you will, or your platforms, then you will be able to sleep at night, right? So I do sleep pretty well knowing that. I do think, in the CTV space, fraud follows money. It goes with anything else. There's always going to be, criminals and fraudsters, and the fraudsters get more and more sophisticated. Um, you know, it's very easy to replicate, duplicate digital signals, right? If you wanted to fraud another industry, you might have to put, a lot into materials and fixed costs and things like that. Whereas digital, you could mimic 100 devices with a relatively, low tech format. So, with more and more budgets going towards CTV, I think we're going to have to see more and more players from across the industry stepping up their game and leaning into how to prevent fraud. There's things that some CTV, content providers have where it might say, after 40 minutes of watching or 2 hours, hey, are you still watching this? Yes or no? And that might just seem like, oh, maybe it's a cost cutting measure or something like that. It's actually a way to prevent fraud, right? Because you're going to have an actual human, say, I'm still watching this, right? That validates that it's actual human watching. It's not invalid traffic. So, it's starting those conversations with partners of yours to say, do you have mechanisms in place that could be low tech? Like, are you still watching? Or do you have, a brand safety vendor that's looking at your traffic 100%? When you do see a spike, what is your process for looking into it? And things like that. So I think the more folks get educated, that will make things a little bit better going down the road. I think you're going to see, unfortunately, if you went back 5 years ago, there was no fraud in CTV. And I think that's, silly and naive of people to think. But with the right defenses, and the right conversations and leaning in with the industry, to set the policies, but then also get people to follow the policies. I think we'll have a really good offense, if you will, to minimize fraud. So pretty excited about it. I think the more, we talk to folks, the more we're educating on our own folks from our team or talking to people and bringing things up and letting them know what some of our policies are, and then they replicate them. And if they can replicate them, then we're all going to win that way.